Welcome to the Good Reading Podcast, proudly sponsored by Book People Gift Cards. A Book People gift card is the perfect gift for readers of all ages. Simply order your gift card online at bookpeoplegiftcards.org.au. Redeem at any one of over 500 bookshops across Australia. Visit bookpeoplegiftcards.org.au. Kathy Mexted is a writer, photographer and editor. Kathy learnt to fly in 1991, but now she writes more than she flies. Kathy married into and then created a flying family and currently lives with her husband Dennis in central Victoria, where they fly a Cessna 180. Kathy is also the author of Australian Women Pilots. Today I'm talking to Kathy Mexted about her new book, Take Flight, Incredible Stories of Australian Women Who Reach for the Sky. Kathy, welcome to the Good Reading Podcast.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Now, your first excursion into the art and science of flying began with jumping off a roof along with your siblings, complete with Superman cape. What did you learn from that experience?
I learned that you shouldn't jump off the roof unless you've got something more useful than a bit of fabric, and not to believe everything you see on telly.
Were there any broken bones as a result of that activity?
No, thankfully, because it wasn't a very big roof. It was the sloping veranda on the back of the house. But it takes a big cup of bravery. Actually, that was something else I learned. And not to trust your brother when he says, come on, you'll be fine.
Let's talk about some of the amazing, courageous, and possibly foolhardy women featured in Take Flight. Sacha Dench flies a thing called a paramotor. What is it and how does it work?
A paramotor is, so you'd start with a paraglider. So a paramotor is a motorized version of a paraglider. So a paraglider is an elliptical wing, what most of us would identify as a parachute. And it is joined to a backpack on your body with paraglider string or fine rope, and it has hand brakes as well. So in each hand you've got a handle connected to a string connected to the trailing edge of the wing above you, and that's how you stop or turn or control it. So with a paramotor you have, I don't know if two-stroke motor is what it was, but it was just a little motor. You can run across the ground. You don't have to jump off anything like you do with a paraglider. So paramotor, you run across a paddock, start up the little engine, sounds like a lawnmower, and you can fly away from a level start, and you can land anywhere you want as well.
Nobody wakes up in the morning and says to themselves, I might take up paramotoring. Where did Sacha's foray into flying begin?
Sacha had a bad experience in the Bahamas or the Caribbean or somewhere in a Cessna, and she was a passenger, and they were caught in bad weather, and she ended up with a really bad fear of flying, which is quite common for a lot of people. And the best way to start overcoming that is to educate yourself about what makes things fly, how they fly, and to understand air. And so it was the turbulence that was bothering her. And so she went and did a gliding course, because gliders get released into the air and rely on thermals and the movement of air to keep them aloft. And she thought, if I can master gliding, then I can conquer this fear of flying. But she didn't really take to gliding very much. And then she discovered paragliding, and she enjoyed that, but it was limited by where you could find the rising air. So you're limited by the weather. And then when she discovered you could stick a motor on the thing and control your altitude and your direction, and you didn't need to hang around ridge lines and hills looking for lift, thermal lift, you can just go wherever you want to, really.
Paramotoring led her to this practice of following migrating swans. Now, that must be an incredible experience to fly with the birds, I guess.
Well, the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, who she was working with at that time and who kind of were heavily involved in this project, were very quick to point out that she wasn't flying with the swans and they weren't interfering with the swans. So she was flying the migratory path that the swans fly, but she wasn't paralleling. Like, you couldn't keep up with the swans anyway. She had to land every couple of hours to thaw out and to talk to people along the flyway, to learn from the hunters and the locals about what their relationship with the swans was and what they thought about why the swans were diminishing in numbers. You're referring to the experience where the swans came and formed up with her on the wing. And she said that was the most beautiful moment, where she was flying along and she saw these two swans coming up behind her. And she was just about to pull a sharp left to avoid hitting them when they just tucked in behind her the right hand side of her wing and flew in formation just for a very short time. But she said it was amazing. The reason that this expedition started was that they were trying to work out why the swans were diminishing in numbers. And so they asked Sacha to write to the stakeholders along the flyway between the UK and Russia. And she thought that's going to take a very long time. And she said, what about we go and fly? I fly it in the Paramotor, and we can talk to people as we come and show our face and exchange information. So they learnt a lot just by showing up and having conversations. So Sacha then went on and did Flight of the Osprey. And just this month, they've launched Flight of the Vulture. So she's now formed Conservation Without Borders. That's her charity. And this is her latest project.
Let's talk about a slightly more familiar kind of air travel, helicopters. Alida Soemawinata's fascination with helicopters began at the tender age of 13, and 2 weeks work experience at the RAAF base in East Sale. Now that's more than most 13-year-olds might imagine when considering work experience.
Yes, Alida was part of the Air Force cadets. So she did, and many of her siblings did the cadet program throughout high school. And in fact, the Air Force cadets features in 3 of the 10 stories. And I didn't set out to do that, but I was surprised that kept popping up. And so as part of one of their holiday programs, she was at East Sale and she went in a helicopter with the doors open. They make a lot of noise, and it's very exciting. And so I've done it as well with the doors off, with the military, flown down from Sydney down to Nara, very low along the cliffs, and it's really exciting. So it's no wonder that at 13 she thought, this is what I'm going to do. And she set out to do it, and she's done it.
Alida's family background is quite interesting too. An Indonesian father and a Dutch mother. Community service or service to people was very much part of their family thinking. And a really lovely sense of service to the community came through later in her career too, didn't it?
When she went to New Guinea, she got awarded Cadet of the Year, which I think was a pretty big deal. She went to the UK, and she also got an award where she went to New Guinea. And she said in the UK, they flew on the Queen's flight. They went to number 10 Downing Street. They had a lot of interaction, and they were really shown around. But when she went to New Guinea, it was on Anzac Day. So they walked part of the Kokoda track. I think they walked the start and the end because the middle of it was closed at that point for some reason. And then on Anzac Day, she said in Port Moresby, we'd hardly seen an expat on the streets. And then suddenly there was 200 of them at the Anzac Day service. And it gave her the opportunity to talk to these nurses and servicemen. And she said it sort of consolidated for her, or brought to the fore, what it was all about, what she was there for. She's just come back from 2 years in Borneo. And her work there involved going out to villages, doing aeromedical transfers, and also kind of like a flying doctor service. So she would fly the doctors and the specialists out on their clinical rounds, and often be called upon to do emergency transfers as well between hospitals, and also from the village into the hospitals and vice versa. And she found that very satisfying.
Wingsuits fascinate me. I imagine it to be just about the closest thing to being a bird. How does a wingsuit work?
So I had to learn that as well. A wingsuit is a synthetic, like a suit, like a jumpsuit, but it's connected at the arms and at the legs. So you look like a bat. So when you put your arms out, it forms like a web between your arms and your body, and the same between your legs. And when you jump out of the aeroplane, it has small air pockets that fill up with air, and they inflate, and then it flies. So it kind of blows itself up, and it flies. So you free fall for a little while. Once it inflates, you start flying as opposed to falling. So generally you're going forward at about 150 to 200 kilometres an hour, and you're going down anything up to about 50 kilometres an hour. You can imagine that glide slope. You're fairly cracking along in a wingsuit.
Heather Swan seems to be a very appropriate name for a wingsuit enthusiast, but I was quite interested in Heather's to-do list, which dated back to the year 2000, which included skydiving. In reading that chapter of your book, it seems that Heather was determined to progress from one terrifying and death-defying activity to the next, where the objective was to overcome progressively challenging fears.
It's quite gripping, that story, isn't it? And it's a great lesson in taking things in bite-sized chunks. So her ultimate aim, she thought it would be very romantic to climb to the top of the highest cliff and jump off it with her husband. She thought that would be a lovely, fun thing to do. And she said, I'd only ever camped in a caravan park. So she was really coming from on the back foot. So when she convinced her husband that this is actually what she wanted to do with him, he gave her a list of things that she had to learn. So it wasn't just that she was looking for adventure, it was they were actually the steps towards base jumping off the mountain. So the first thing she had to learn was skydiving, because when you base jump, you then pull a parachute and fly down. So she had to do 200 skydives, but her first skydive, she stepped with trembling feet out onto the strut of the Cessna, and she looked around and she thought, are any of these people normal? And I wrote in the story, you can issue any expletive you like here, because Heather was thinking all of them. And yeah, she wasn't very good at skydiving to start with, but her time was up and she then had to go on to the next thing, which was caving in New Zealand. And when she got to do the caving, she said to the cavers, I've just failed at skydiving. And they said, oh, we would never go skydiving, but we're happy to take you caving. Then she had to learn to bungee jump, because bungee jumping, she had to learn to do it first being tied at the feet, the way you normally do it. But then they put the belt around her waist so she could learn to fly like a swan. So she jumped off the bungee platform and spread her arms out and was controlling her descent, stabilizing herself with her legs, her feet, as well as you do when you're skydiving. And then she came back to the skydiving. And
should we mention to other aspiring bungee jumpers about the hole that exploded in Heather's duodenum, small intestine, following her first bungee jump?
would that frighten the children?
It could do, but it's a cautionary tale, should I add.
When she did the bungee jumping, she had an ill-fitting piece of apparatus that caused a rupture in her duodenum, and that was very serious, and she ended up requiring emergency surgery. And they were going to ditch the task after that because they thought this is really getting out of hand. But when the insurance guy said, oh, well, you just find another woman to go with you, and Heather fired up then. She said, I'm not sending my husband off into the vast interior with some other woman. And so she galvanized. And she said the main thing she did was to get rid of the people who were not supportive. So anybody who was telling her, you're going to kill yourself, she had to push them to the outer and bring in the people who knew what they were talking about and who could support her through this. So with the skydiving, to reduce the fear and the anxiety of it, she started watching videos of how skydiving is done until she knew what was going to happen and she could visualize it and normalize it. And when she went back to do the skydiving, she was all over it. She said, I came back with a completely different attitude. I was informed and I loved it. Yeah, she loves skydiving.
So education or self-education is really the key to overcoming many of these fears.
Yeah, a lot of the time it's just lack of awareness, and you need a lot of education to be able to undertake some of these activities anyway. Kirsten Cedo has a very cautionary tale about going off half-cocked. Yeah, you need to. She said, I just didn't know what I didn't know, and she ended up with a broken arm. And she said, now when I see people not respecting the rules, I have to appreciate that they don't realise why the rules are there. Sometimes you just don't know.
If what we've talked about isn't crazy enough, along comes Stef Walter, whose foray into crazy activities began with the Moomba Birdman Rally. Now, a Birdman Rally seems a relatively sensible activity by comparison with most of the activities described in Take Flight. The primary risk seems mostly that you might get wet. But Steph's exploits didn't end there. She graduated to wing walking. What is it, and where might one go to study the art and science of such madness?
Steph went in the Birdman rally because she had seen it and just thought that looks like fun. And so there's a whole story about how she achieved that. And it was a very funny story. And I actually asked around and said, does anyone know any women who've ever been in the Birdman rally? And someone said, yeah, Steph. So I said to her, I'm just going to take the mickey out of you, Steph, because this is just so funny. She goes, yeah. She didn't care. So I had fun writing that story. And then she came up with the wing walking happened after I'd finished the story. And I saw it on her Facebook page. And so I had to go back and add more to her story. Wing walking was popular in the 30s, in the early days of Hollywood, as a stunt. So people would climb up to the top of the aircraft wing, usually a biplane with two wings and an open cockpit. So you can climb out of the seat up onto the wing, strap yourself in, and then the aeroplane does aerobatics and you hang on for dear life.
You certainly would.
And there's great detail in her story about how that panned out and how she feels about it now.
All of the activities we've been talking about and you've described in Take Flight are all very risky, if not extremely risky activities. What do you think drives people to take up such challenges?
I think some of them have a zest for life and they may not seem particularly risky to that person if that's what they've chosen. They all come to it from a different angle. So there's no one common denominator that causes somebody to walk into a flying school or a skydiving school, or some of them actively pursue the adventure. There is always an element of risk if you're going to get airborne, and it's about managing that risk. And the risk is managed, again, I say, through education and training. So you've got to go to the right place, talk to the right people and get the right training, and then operate within the boundaries of your abilities. Some of them I can't explain why they did them. And I wonder why. Why would you go walk on a wing? For Steph, it was just, she was at an air show and her and her dad were standing there and they saw the wing walkers and her dad said, who would ever do that? And she's thinking, I might like to do that. Even Emma McDonald, who is the air race pilot, she said, I wouldn't do that. Actually, the people that Steph went and did that wing walking course was the only one in the world, and they've just been closed down. It was only like less than 6 months after she'd been there, and they've been operating for 3 generations. That business has been going for 100 years, and Steph just got in. It's pretty risky. Like there's no parachute, no safety, but they had a lot of people sign up for it. Like she said, she applied every year for 6 years before they had a spot for her. But I know another girl in the US, she'd been a Coast Guard helicopter rescue pilot. And since she's retired, she's taken up gliding and she's done different stuff. She'd done it as well. I saw it on her Facebook post and I'm like, the hell is that, you know? Then when I saw it on Steph's, I'm like, hang on, who are these people?
Kathy, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for joining me on the Good Reading Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg.
I've been talking to Kathy Mexted about her new book, Take Flight, Incredible Stories of Australian Women Who Reach for the Sky. It's published by New South Books, and you can find it at goodreadingmagazine.com.au. My name's Greg Dobbs, and thanks for listening. This Good Reading Podcast was brought to you by Book People Gift Cards. Share the joy of reading with a Book People gift card. To find out more, visit bookpeoplegiftcards.org.au.